this morning all together. And all God's people said, amen. Thank you. The year was 280 BC, and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world had just been completed. It was a statue known as the Colossus. It stood at its highest point about 150 feet off the water, and it was said to have spanned the harbor mouth of the city of Rhodes. And there's one artist's ancient woodcut, awkward depiction of it. I much prefer Salvador Dali's picture, but we don't know what it looks like. 50 years after it was constructed, an earthquake broke it down, and then about 1,000 years later, the whole thing was destroyed in an invasion. But it was known as the Colossus, and it was a statue of the Greek god of the sun, Helios, built to commemorate the fact that we kept people out. The city of Rhodes successfully defended themselves from an invasion force, and to celebrate, they made a massive statue. This morning, I want to tell you about a new Colossus, one that celebrates not keeping people out, but welcoming people in. The new Colossus is the name of a poem, and this is how it goes. You may have heard of it. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that with twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. You may have heard it. It is engraved on a bronze plaque on Ellis Island at the Statue of Liberty. A monument to welcoming people in. Now, I don't know if you've been following the news of what's happening at the U.S.-Mexican border, or if you heard about the migrants who drowned attempting to cross the English Channel this week as they all loaded onto a dinghy that wasn't designed to carry 100 people. But there are millions of people in the world right now that are longing to move from one country to a better one, hoping to get in, hoping for a better life, more security, more privilege, more joy. And the question for people who are already there is, who gets in? And who do we want? Under what criteria would we welcome someone into our fair land? And perhaps an even more important question is, who does Jesus want? Because in Matthew's gospel, Jesus comes announcing that people should change the way they live because God's kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, is at hand. The rule and the reign of God has broken in upon human history, and that demands our attention and that we change what we're about. And we've been journeying through Matthew's gospel, and we just finished the Sermon on the Mount, the first major block of Jesus' teaching in this gospel. And so far, we've learned that the kingdom belongs to people who are following Jesus. If you want into the kingdom, you need to follow Jesus, and also that if you want in, you need to have a righteousness that is superior to the religious leaders, to the most religious people of the day. You've got to beat them to get in. See, the bad news is that the stakes are incredibly high and the standards are incredibly high. The good news is that it actually comes as a gift. All right, the kingdom is for those who are hungry and thirsty for it, for those who are poor in spirit, for those who recognize their need. When Jesus comes onto the scene, he's doing 3 things. He is teaching people in the synagogues. He is proclaiming the good news, God's kingdom is at hand, and he's doing miraculous deeds. He's healing people. And Matthew, immediately after telling us that, tells us a large chunk of what Jesus was teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. And now for the next 2 chapters, we're going to look at several miraculous deeds, authoritative deeds that Jesus does. But this morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. If you have a Bible, you can turn there and follow along with me. I'm going to read it in totality, and then we're going to talk it through on the screen. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. And a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy, and then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." And Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion replied, "Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to that one, 'Come,' and he comes. And I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. He said to those following him, "Truly, I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. Now when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. And when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. "He took up our infirmities, and he bore our diseases." May the Lord bless the reading of his word. 3 miraculous healing stories. All right, Matthew in chapters 8 and 9 will actually give us 3 sets of 3 amazing miracles of Jesus, but we're going to start with the first group of them. All right, a leper, a centurion, and a mother-in-law. Side note, archaeologists are pretty sure we know where Peter's house is in Capernaum. We found it, but that's a side note for a different time. All right, and if all you walked away from reading these stories is that Jesus, man, this guy's amazing, then I have done my job well. All right, that's it. If Jesus just sounds good to you, great. But there's a lot more going on that I'm excited to talk to you about, because Matthew, he is so concise in his details. So we're going to flesh this out with some awesome background. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. Remember, he saw the crowds, he left them to go up on a mountain, and his disciples followed him, and he began to teach them. But the crowds were listening in, and when Jesus had finished his amazing sermon on the mount, they were amazed at his authoritative teaching, because their teachers weren't like that. And when Jesus comes down, here are the crowds, and all of a sudden, a man with leprosy came. I have a little asterisk here. If you guys are familiar with the modern disease, Hansen's disease, what we call nowadays leprosy, that may or may not be what the ancient writers were referring to. Leprosy was an umbrella term for a variety of terrible, life-altering skin diseases. And he came and he knelt before Jesus and he said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." So let's talk about leprosy. It's horrible. Not only is it a disease that will eventually kill you and ruin your life, I'm speaking in generalities here, but it carries a social stigma that, the closest analogy was like what AIDS carried 30 years ago. Not only does it wreck your life, it ruins your life. Here's a leper. "Lord, will you make me clean if you're willing?" See, in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, we read that anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes. Let their hair be unkept, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean, and they must live alone. They must live outside the camp. So this man who comes to Jesus is likely disheveled, wearing a face mask, and is just icky. And yet, with audacious boldness, he comes close to Jesus. It's not something you're really supposed to do. You should keep your distance. Because for the Israelites, being clean was something they were supposed to do. Why? Because God was holy. Earlier in Leviticus, it says, "I'm Yahweh your God, consecrate yourselves and be holy because I'm holy. Don't make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground." The idea was that God is holy, he's special, and that the people who represent him to the world should live in a unique kind of way. So they should, as they can, maintain cleanliness. It wasn't a sin to be unclean, but it was a sin to go in an unclean state into the presence of a holy God. As an analogy, think of the sun, the source of light and life here upon planet Earth. And as I've said to some of you guys before the service started this morning, I don't know about you, but my whole life gets better when the sun comes out in Portland. Like, I'm just happier now that it's springtime. But I'm really glad that that gigantic ball of burning gas is about 93 million miles that way. I don't have to go too far before I require special equipment to even get any closer. I mean, that thing will destroy me if I get too close to it. In a similar way, the holiness of God is a sign that he is a source of light and life. But the fact that life swallows up death, the intensity of God's goodness means that you cannot carry the weight of sin, the stain of death upon you into his presence, or you're a goner. It's not because God is evil. It's just because he's so, so good. So the Israelites were called to regularly maintain cleanliness, and they had to be on the lookout. So if you were a leper, bad news for you. Not only were you forbidden access to the most holy place, all right, the temple where God resided among his people, but you couldn't even live with the people of God. You were consigned out to the wilderness. You were a stranger on the edges, the fringes of society. All right, this disease ruined your life, and then it ruined your life as well. You're out there with no hope, because nothing can cleanse a leper. In the Old Testament, cleansing a leper is put on par with raising the dead. Like, this is impossible. And yet, here's a leper coming to Jesus, and he calls him Lord. And he doesn't even question that Jesus can heal him. He just wonders, Jesus, are you willing to? It's not your power that's in question, it's your character. Jesus, if you are willing, Lord, you can make me clean. He's not asking to be healed, he's asking to be made clean. And then Jesus reaches out his hand and he touches the man. I don't know the last time this man experienced human contact, but Jesus touches him. And it's all the more impressive because the very next story tells us that Jesus could have done it from a distance with a word. He didn't have to touch this guy. He chose to. He chose to touch him before he healed him, not even afterwards. He says, I am willing, be clean. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. But then Jesus says something puzzling. He says, see, one, you don't tell anyone, but instead go show yourself to the priest, offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Jesus fulfills the Torah. He holds up the standards of the laws of Moses. And because we just preached there, guys, I, of course, went into a deep dive. I'm like, this is so good. Because not only is Jesus trying to keep things quiet so he can have an active ministry up in Galilee, but he is actually bringing restoration into this person's life. I just want to tell you about it. See, the only person with the authority to declare a leper to be cleansed and to welcome him back into the community was a priest. All right, this is what the law said. The priest had to give the seal of approval on a cleansed leper. So this man is going to need to travel down to Jerusalem, stay outside the city, and a priest will be sent out to inspect him. Out there, once realizing this guy is no longer a leper, he has been cleansed, they'll make this sacrifice of 2 birds and scarlet yarn, and it has all of these beautiful echoes of the story of Noah and the ark. And this man, because of the sacrifice, will get to cross a threshold and come into the community. He'll get to come into town. But he doesn't get to stay there yet. He's still in a consecration period. For 7 days, he's going to wait at the door of his house. And then on the 8th day, he brings a sacrifice to the temple, to God's space. And there he goes through a ordination-like ceremony, where the blood of this first guilt offering is put on the lobe of his ear and the thumb of his right hand and the big toe of his right foot. It's like when you ordain a high priest, only instead of becoming a priest, he is just becoming a member again of God's people. Now you belong here among us. You can stay. And then he goes through a purification offering, and then he offers a burnt offering for sin. And at that point, he has gone from the outskirts and fringes of society, and now he is a fully fledged member of God's people, able to come and experience the presence of God for the very first time. This is one of the longest ceremonies in the entire Old Testament. I mean, it's only 100 words less than the Day of Atonement or the ordination of the high priest. It's a huge, big deal. And it leaves off right at the moment, and this is all that's required. But if you've studied Leviticus like we did, you know that at this point, a person went from being unable to ever approach not only God's people, but God himself. And now he stands at the threshold of God's space, clean, atoned for, and if he so chose, he can make a peace offering. This leper, at this point, having been cleansed and announced to be clean, could now have a feast in the presence of God with his family and friends. He's been restored to God and to God's people. This is a restoration. Jesus indeed made the leper cleansed, and now he's saying, let's do this right. You belong now. You who are on the outskirts. Jesus is so, so good. Now, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. And Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? So there's a modern historical reenactment guy, Roman centurion, a ruler leading a cohort of men, probably one of the more powerful people in the town of Capernaum, a military commander with the power of life and death in his hand, and yet an outsider. The Romans are the occupying force in Palestine, and the Jews, they don't really care much for the Romans. See, when Jesus says, shall I come and heal him, the centurion replies, Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. We read later in the book of Acts that the Jews considered the houses of the Gentiles to be spaces that were unclean. You wouldn't go to the house of a Gentile. I don't deserve to have you with me. Though this man has power here, he's helpless because his servant is paralyzed and can't move. He's stuck. And the centurion, for all his might, can't do anything about it. And he recognizes an authority greater than his own, and he comes to Jesus and he says, Lord, I have a servant who's hurting. And when Jesus says, shall I come? He says, I don't deserve to have you even under my roof. True. He says, but you just say the word. My servant will be healed. I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes, and I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. I understand how authority works, and I recognize that you have it, and I don't. I come not from a position of power, but one of supplication. I need you, Jesus, to do for me and for my servant what I cannot. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. No, he's blown out of his mind. Okay, 7 times in Matthew's gospel, people are dumbfounded. They're amazed. 6 of those times, it's people looking at Jesus. And here is the only instance of Jesus whoa. The crowds were impressed at Jesus' authoritative teaching, and right now this centurion is impressing Jesus. And he turns to those who are following him. He's like, guys, I've not found anyone in Israel with such great faith, which in Matthew's gospel consistently means that people who believe that God is able and willing to act to change their immediate circumstances, that Jesus can do something about the situation. It's like, no one's like this guy. He commends the centurion, and then he tells his followers something startling. He says, I tell you the truth. Many are going to come from the east and west. All right, the foreigners, the outsiders, those on the fringes of society, those to whom the Jews think don't belong in God's kingdom. And they're going to be welcomed in. They're going to take their places at the feast with the Jewish patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the kingdom of heaven. All right? The outsiders will get in. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a great reversal. Those we thought were on the outside, they get in. But those we thought were on the inside, they're going out. Why? Because they have no need for Jesus. Because light has come into darkness, and they have no use for the light. And so they won't belong. The kingdom is open to all who need Jesus, and for no one who doesn't. And Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would, and the servant was healed from that moment. I like to tell my kids, Jesus, he can heal without even looking. He can do it with his eyes closed. He's powerful. He has authority. And next week, we're going to talk a lot more about the authority that Jesus possesses. Now when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. It's just a small, quiet story, easily missed, about a sick woman lying in bed with a fever. And unlike the leper, she's not advocating for herself. And unlike the centurion, no one's advocating for her. She's just there, and Jesus takes notice of her. He sees her, and he cares about her. And he touches her hand, and the fever is up and gone. So much so that not only, it's not like the fever broke and she's going to lie in bed recovering for the next day. No, she's like, good. And so she gets up and she serves a meal. She begins to wait on Jesus. All these fringes of society people, lepers, the diseased, the discouraged, those with power but not reputation, and those that most of us are willing to overlook. Jesus sees, he cares, he knows, he heals. And that evening, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word. He healed all the sick. And this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and he bore our diseases. Which is, it's almost funny. Because if you go read Isaiah, you realize Isaiah's not talking about physical diseases. He's talking about sin. The suffering servant Isaiah speaks is about someone who's going to bear the sin of the people of Israel and be himself a guilt offering to atone for the sins of the people. But it uses the language of sickness. And Matthew is quoting it to say, not only did Jesus come to deal with our sin, he came to deal with the effects of sin. Because if you're not familiar with the biblical story, when humanity made the turn away from God, not only did sin come into the world, but death and disease and discord. All right, relational problems between us and God, us and one another, and even us and the earth itself. It all broke. And Jesus came not only to deal with the core issues, but all of the effects of it as well. He took up our infirmities. He bore our diseases. He's amazing. And so if I was going to summarize it for you guys, I'd just say this. Jesus is the authoritative teacher and healer whose kingdom is for all who trust in him, all who need him, all who believe in him. Really, if you want to go from like chapter 5 to chapter 9, you'd say Jesus has the authoritative words and the authoritative actions to welcome us into the kingdom of God. But if we ask that question, who is the kingdom for? Who gets in and who stays out? Jesus shows us that the kingdom is for a leper and a centurion and a sick woman. These people exemplified those beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The kingdom of heaven belongs to such as them. The kingdom is for anyone who needs Jesus. This is good news. And the kingdom is not for those who already think they have it. Those who think we're in already, who presume that due to our ethnicity, due to our family, due to our own personal history, like we're in, but we're in without needing Jesus. Oh, the kingdom's not for you. We see this amazing truth that Jesus moves towards those who need him. He heals those who need him. He welcomes those who trust in him, who believe in him. Guys, isn't it so good that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer? I was watching to see if anyone chuckled because I totally slipped in the J.R.R. Tolkien quote there. Does anyone recognize it? Yes, okay. It's from The Return of the King, if you're familiar with the books. You may know the character Aragorn. He is the rightful heir to the throne of Gondor. And the first time we see him enter this country that he should rule and reign as king, it's on the Battle of the Fields of Pelennor. If you've seen the movie, that is like the awesome battle in front of that multi-tiered city. And they won the day, but the cost was high. And here's a city in mourning, and everyone in the city who have been living without a king for 1,000 years are mourning and grieving because their rulers are either dead or suffering or dying. And they are afflicted with a disease that's not a sword wound, but something called the Black Breath. And none of their physicians and none of their healers can handle it. And there's this woman named Eorth who speaks up and says, oh, that we had a king in Gondor, because it was said long ago that the hands of a king are the hands of a healer. And so Aragorn, who is the rightful one to reign, he doesn't come as a tyrant asserting his dominion over the city. He first enters the city with a veiled hood, and he goes to the houses of healing, and he begins to cure the people who need him. And it's only later, after the tyranny of Sauron has been overthrown and Mordor is broken, that Aragorn returns now in triumph, and the gates of the city are welcomed open to him. Why? Because this is the king we want. This is the guy we want to let rule over us. Look at his character. He's the healer. When we come to Jesus, he is the one who welcomes people into God's kingdom, who claims absolute authority over whether we get in or out, who says that we either build our life upon what he says or we're a fool and our lives are headed towards ruin. He makes some pretty startling claims, and either the guy is a crazy tyrant or he's just the best ruler in the world because of who he is. Isn't it good that the hands of our king are the hands of a healer? And so what? Well, have you ever been lonely? Have you ever found yourselves on the fringes? Unnoticed, excluded, sick, messy, broken? Your issues are too big for anyone else to handle? Hurting, needy, undeserving? You guys felt like that? I know I have. I have good news for you. Jesus is for us, and his kingdom is for us. And so, we need to recognize who Jesus is. He is the Lord, and he is the King. He has authority, and we need to recognize our need for him. All right, here's good news. You want into the kingdom? You want to be part of the church? We have one requirement to be here, and it's crazy, crazy high. In order to be here and to belong, you must be a sinner. All right? No one else welcome. Sinners only. If you are needy for Jesus, we welcome you. And if you don't need Jesus, then so long. This is the requirement. This is how we get in. Jesus is for us, and we so need him. And so I want to invite you to pray for healing this morning. I know it's a little bit crazy to make that turn, but Jesus has the power, the authority, and the willingness to heal. And we're told to pray for it. He says, ask for what you need from God. He already knows what you need. Jesus' half-brother James, later in the New Testament, will write, "Is anyone among you sick? Let him call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise him up. If they've sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other. Pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." And so I don't know what else to do other than take Jesus at the word and say, if you need healing this morning, call for Sterling and I. We will come. We will anoint you with oil. And yes, that is as awkward on our end as it is on yours. That's okay. This is what Jesus says. And if there's sin you need to confess, confess it. And prayers are effective. Now here's what I'm sure of. Jesus rose from the dead. Therefore, one day, we all too will rise. In the end, all of our prayers for healing will be fully answered. But in my own life, I've seen enough examples where I know that Jesus can sometimes heal, and does sometimes heal now. I've heard the stories of people cured from cancer they were supposed to die with. I've heard crazy, crazy, amazing stories. Jesus does heal people. But I've also heard the stories of the times that Jesus doesn't. See the Apostle Paul at the end of 2 Corinthians. Sometimes God chooses not to. I don't know why, but I know it's not because he's not powerful enough to, and I know it's not because he doesn't love us, and it's not because he's not good. So, welcome to the tension of following Jesus. I just don't know. But still, we might as well ask. We'd like to pray for you. But if this is our king, and if he's a healer, and if he really is this good, and he goes to the kind of people that none of us would ever want to spend our time around, what does that mean for others? Because if there's others who are lonely or unnoticed or excluded or sick or messy or broken, who just are way too much for us to handle. See, the truth is that Jesus is for them too. And his kingdom is for them too. Therefore, his people ought to be for them as well. So may we go to the margins with the authoritative word, you too are welcome. Doesn't matter how messy they are. All right, our standards to get in, they're crazy high. All right, it's just one thing you have to do to qualify. You have to be a sinner who needs Jesus. Oh, welcome. Maybe you smell bad. Maybe you're someone that we don't get along with. Maybe you're from that community that is oppressing us, or that we've been looking down on. Maybe you're the kind of person that we would all love to ignore, and we do so well, so often. Doesn't matter. If you need Jesus, then you belong. You're welcome. Jesus came for you. And so we come for you too. May we go to the margins with the authoritative command. Jesus sends us there. Come, heal, and love, and welcome, and include, and serve, and sacrifice for these people. And if you're new to Family of Grace, let me tell you about some of these people. I have watched them as people come into our building and they are welcomed. Sometimes they are a mess, both figuratively and literally. They make a mess. And if Christ touches a leper, if Jesus washes his disciples' feet, here's the sober truth, that there is no job that is beneath me. If it involves loving people, then there's nothing that is beneath me. That means we bring people who are bleeding bandages. It means we bring people who are incontinent stuff to clean up, and sometimes we clean up for them. It means we go to the sick, we change the diapers. We do the hard, messy work of simply loving people because Christ loved them. Jesus is for them, and so we are for them too. It means they may blow off, steam and be the kind of people that the rest of society doesn't know how to handle, and we're going to out-patient and out-love them because of Jesus. It's not up to us. This is the way our King has told us to go. It's so hard sometimes. Lord, help us. But Christ is for them, and so may we be for them too. So give us, O world, give us your tired and your poor. Give us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to us, because we lit our lamp beside the kingdom's door. So says the church, as my friend Claire Maria said. This should be about us. Jesus moves towards those who need him. May we. Jesus heals those who need him. May we. Jesus welcomes those who believe in him. May we. He's our King, and he's our healer. And isn't it so, so good? The hands of our King are the hands of a healer. Would you pray with me? Father, help us to believe that real authority doesn't dominate, but it serves. That the real power is meant to be used to make other people's lives better. Father, thank you that our mess was not too messy for you, that our sin did not overwhelm you. Jesus, thank you for being contagiously holy, contagiously clean, for being the one who never rejects us because you can't handle us, who never turns us away because, you didn't come for people like us, who never overlooks us because you see the people the rest of us overlook. And so, God, train our eyes to see the needs around us. Grant our hearts compassion for messy people who need to be loved. And Father, thank you that your Son is our King. May we walk in his ways and learn from him. And would you heal us, Lord? We desperately need your healing now and forever until Christ comes.